Hi everybody, Scott here. I just wanted to talk about the MBTI for a moment. Just the idea that there's people that swear by the MBTI. They see the truth in it. They see their truth in it, and they see their own. It identifies parts of their own life, and it helps to explain how they think. Why they think the way they do, and at least the way they process information, how they see the world, and so on. There's other people that just have no time for it, and so I just want to kind of look at some of the reasons why for that, and just maybe hopefully provide some sort of clarity or a balanced view. So there's people that read too much into the MBTI, and there's those that don't give it enough of a thought. The reality is, for me, in regards to my own personal walk and the work that I do with clients, the MBTI has been a very, very valuable tool. I certainly see truth in it, and I do see a correlation between the theory and people's experience. When I speak to if I was to speak to two people, let's say I was to speak to an INFP and an INFJ, and I was to describe, without them necessarily knowing their type or understanding the cognitive functions, I could describe FI to both of them, and one will resonate strongly with it, the other will not really understand it. So when I've found, when I've sort of sensed a person's type in counselling where we haven't really looked at it formally, and I start to speak to them from my awareness of the cognitive functions, I get a lot of feedback. I get a lot of head nodding. And I know that if I was just adopt a totally different language, let's say I started to describe an ESTP, sort of saying to an INFP, start to describe characteristics of an ESTP, I know that it's not going to land. And that's happened enough for me in counselling to acknowledge that there is a real truth to the theory, and it can be very beneficial. I think other reasons why some people love it, some people have really no time for it, is because for some personality types, the description is a kind of a so what. It's like, yeah, you're describing me, but there's been 1,000 people that have described me that way. The MBTI is kind of just, it's not really telling me anything really new about myself. And that comes down to some cultural things whereby, for not 100%, but thinking logic and the thinking preference is usually promoted over the feeling. Sensing over the intuitive, extrovert over the introvert. For the most part, it's not 100%. But there seems to be a leaning towards favoring those preferences over the other. So most people get a sense of affirmation about their type just naturally through life, where others don't. So it's the NF personality that I think is disadvantaged the most when it comes to sort of natural affirmation. And so the MBTI becomes a tool to help NFs to be affirmed in who they are, and so there's a lot of truth that comes to them through the theory that hasn't come to them through culture, through the school system, through parenting. It certainly can, but for a lot of NFs, for more NFs perhaps than other types, there can be that lack of affirmation. So the truth hits home a lot harder for certain personality types over others when they're introduced to the theory. There's people that just see it as rubbish, and a lot of people that see it that way have gone on to do a lot more, are a lot more educated. And I don't say that necessarily as a positive. There's certainly nothing wrong with being educated, but there comes a point where there's this sort of idea that knowledge puffs up, and that we can become too intellectual for our own good, so to speak. And the trick is that the people that look down upon it, there's truth in what they're saying, but I think it sort of goes too far the other way. People that are more educated, if you like, than others, this is sort of look at it from a more positive perspective, see that people are reading way too far into the MBTI to explain a whole lot of behaviors that could be described in from many other different places, for different perspectives, and that's kind of where the MBTI gets watered down, is that there's so many other ways that one could describe a behavior or a process, a cognitive process, than from just the MBTI, and that there's a sense that there is an overlap where everybody, everyone could describe in themselves to some degree a sort of a sense of introverted feeling, regardless of whether it's in the stack or not. And vice versa for all the other cognitive functions, that we can all see sort of parts of that, like just because someone's extroverted thinking doesn't mean that they don't sit there in their own thoughts and process things, right? So there's certainly a case for the fact that we can all use all the cognitive functions to some degree, and that a lot of things could be described. But I think the reality is that the MBTI and the theory and the cognitive stack, I think, is a way of introducing, or it's a way of sort of targeting specific ways that we think. And it doesn't describe everything, but it's kind of like a lens in which to see certain ways that we think that we might favor over others. We may focus on or pay attention to specific details, or focus in a specific way, that the MBTI, when we look at it through that lens, we're able to kind of see that process within ourselves a lot clearer, and enhance that part of ourselves, and develop that skill, develop that process more, and also helps us to identify ways that aren't strong, aren't comfortable ways for us, but there might be ways that we need to develop in regards to maybe some of the work that we're doing, or some of our goals require us to develop other parts of ourselves. And when we understand our type, our best fit type, as they call it, then we're able to identify maybe areas, we could either call them weaknesses or growth areas, where we're like, okay, I might need to pay a bit of attention to that, because I'm going to need that part of myself a little more in the work that I'm doing, and I can see why I'm getting stressed, because that's not a strong part of me. Let's say for the INFJ, that extroverted sensing part, when there's too much of that, it can get stressful. But when we become aware of our inferior function and recognize why we're stressed, we can be less stressed because we understanding why we're stressed. So when we're going into a situation that is pushing on our inferior function, we're better able to cope and handle that. So there's a lot of helpfulness that comes from the theory, but it is definitely not the be end and end all, which I think is some of its criticism. And I think it's a legitimate criticism that people can read too much into the MBTI. So I think it's about holding it all, holding it sort of all in tension, holding it in tension, if you like, and being open to the MBTI where it's helpful, being open to other ways to describe some of our characteristics, our processing, I should say, and I guess some of the stereotypes that are placed over the various types. That there could be other reasons for that behavior other than sort of cognitive processes and functions. But I think to throw the MBTI away is detrimental, in a sense detrimental, or it can limit one's growth in certain ways, certainly if they need some truth that comes from it. But sort of wholeheartedly taking it on and seeing all of life through it is also a sort of detrimental or unhelpful, and so it's about holding it all in balance. So anyway, I just wanted to share some thoughts about around how the MBTI can be helpful, and the reality that some of what the MBTI describes can be described from other angles and perspectives, and that holding on to it too much is an issue, and throwing it away entirely can be problematic. So I think it's about keeping it oneself all open to the way that it can be described, or the way the self can be described. And some people might gravitate more to the MBTI description and what it offers. Some people might need just a certain aspect of the theory to help them to unlock something and move on. Others might camp there for a while and spend some time understanding themselves from that perspective before moving on. I think there's so many variables that it's just important not to throw anything away, and to remain open to the pros and cons of a perspective, of a theory. And anyway, I hope all of that's helpful, and they're just some thoughts, and I'll see you in another video.